Good morning, brethren, and welcome to our bi-weekly program entitled A Glance at the Word, which is broadcast live on Facebook every Monday and every Wednesday at 8:30 a.m. West Africa time, which is GMT +1. Today, Wednesday, the 15th of September, we're going to continue with the topic that we started on Monday the 13th, and which is entitled, What Profit is it to fear God? What profit is it to fear God? You remember on Monday, we spent much of our time talking about the frustration that many of us born-again Christians have when they compare their lives to the lives of those who don't fear God, to the lives of unbelievers, to the lives of what the Bible calls the wicked. We all know many unbelievers who are very prosperous and who are highly rich, or who are holding high positions in society, while we born-again Christians are living in dire poverty or find ourselves in dire straits. Thus, Christians who feel miserable when they compare their lives to the lives of unbelievers fall into frustration. And they keep on wondering what profit it is to fear the Lord. Now, even Simon Peter, the great apostle, manifested that same frustration, as we read yesterday in Mark chapter 10, verse 28. Peter asked Jesus what profit they would get for having abandoned everything to follow him. He told Jesus something like this: Look, Jesus, we have abandoned all that we had. We have abandoned our jobs. We have abandoned our salaries. We have abandoned our houses. We have abandoned our family just to follow you. What profit will we get for having done that? What will be our profit in abandoning everything to follow you, Jesus? You know, this concern of Simon Peter is also the concern of all the frustrated born-again Christians. Yet we must know one very important thing. God never forgets any of his children. God never forgets any born-again Christian. God hears our voices. God hears our cries. God hears our prayers. And God is willing to make the difference between those who serve him, those who fear him, those who are born-again Christians, and the unbelievers. God is willing to set the difference between these two categories of people. This we must know. Let's read our first passage this morning, Mark chapter 10. Yesterday we read verse 28. Today we'll read verses 29 and 30. Or maybe we read from 28 so that we'll have in mind why Jesus answered like this. So, Mark chapter 10, verses 28 to 30. Then Peter began to say to him, See, we have left all and followed you. So Jesus answered and said, As Assuredly, I say to you, there is no one who has left house or brothers or sisters or father or mother or wife or children or lands for my sake and the gospel's, who shall not receive 100-fold now and this time houses and brothers and sisters and mothers and children and lands with persecutions, and in the age to come eternal life. So this is Jesus' answer. You know, here Jesus is reassuring Peter. He's reassuring Simon Peter, telling him that one cannot commit himself to Jesus Christ and be a loser. You will not be a loser. On the contrary, Jesus promised every Christian that he would get much more than what they sacrifice for this in their lives for the sake of the gospel. He reassured and he promised every Christian, every born-again Christian, that they will get much more than whatever they sacrifice, because they fear God, because they fear the Lord. And Jesus clearly said that these huge blessings, these huge rewards will be accompanied with persecutions. That is, hard times. Thus, let me tell you that any hardship that we may be experiencing now may only be part of those hard times, part of those persecutions that Jesus talked about. So don't focus on your hardship. Don't focus on your persecutions. Don't focus on your hard times. Instead, focus on God and on God alone. Do whatever is honest to go out of that storm, out of that hardship, but continue praising and worshiping God without any complaint. Turn your eyes to God, not to your hardship, not to your storm, not to your persecutions. Never doubt God's love for you. Continue fearing and serving God faithfully. I'm certain that your reward is already on its way to you. Sooner or later, you will get it. Sooner or later, you will be rewarded. Sooner or later, you will see your reward coming to you. You know, God never lies. God is not a man. He never tells lies. What God promises, He always fulfills. And God promises us a much better life than the life that we had before we came to Him. He promised us a better life, a much better life than the life that we left behind. Thus, let me assure you that the best for you is always to come. The best is still to come. No matter what wonderful life you are having today or you have been having yesterday, your future life will be much more better than this one. God is always willing to reward us for fearing Him and for serving Him. This is what Jesus said. So God always considers us as his servants. He also considers us as his soldiers. Let's read another passage now. Let's read in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 9. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 7 to 10. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 7 to 10. Whoever goes to war at his own expense, who plants a vineyard and does not eat of its fruit, or who tends a flock and does not drink of the milk of the flock. Do I say these things as a mere man, or does not the law say the same also? For it is written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. Is it oxen God is concerned about? Or does he say it altogether for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt. This is written, that he who plows should plow in hope, and he who threshes in hope should be partaker of his hope. So you see, we are God's soldiers, as I told you. And we are also God's servants, as you well know. So we are always at war for the interests of God. And it is quite logic that God rewards us for that. We are fighting God's wars. We are fighting for God's interests. We are at war against God's enemies because we are soldiers of the Most High God. And quite naturally, the Most High God, who is our employer, will reward us. He will repay us for warring for him, for going at war for him. And we also are workers in the fields of God. You know, when you go to evangelize, when you talk of Jesus all around you, when you share the gospel, you are working on God's field. And when by your behavior, your attitudes, you are showing God's glory in your life, so that people who see your life will be interested to come to Jesus Christ, you are working in the field of the Lord. So you are God's worker, and every worker deserves a salary. So we deserve a salary from God, and that salary is the reward that God has promised us. That salary is the reward that God gives us. So serving God or fearing God is highly profitable. And moreover, let me tell you one very important thing. We must not covet unbelievers. Never, never covet unbelievers. They may seem prosperous today. They may seem as if they are living very, very well today. But all doesn't end today. There is still a future. So let's read in the book of Psalms. There are many, many passages that we could read to show that we must not covet unbelievers. To show that we must not at all be envious of unbelievers. But we're going to read only this Psalm 73. Psalm 73, which is a psalm of Asaph. Psalm 73. we're going to read first verses 2 and 3. Psalm 73, verses 2 and 3. After that, we read verses 12 and 13. 12 and 13. And after that, we read again verses 16 to 19. Verses 16 to 19. So now let's read Psalms chapter 73, verses 2 to 3. But as for me, my feet had almost stumbled. My steps had nearly slipped. For I was envious of the boastful when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. You see, this is what we talked about on Monday. So there are people who are envious of unbelievers. They are envious of those who don't fear God when they see the prosperity of those people, when they see the riches of those unbelievers. And here, as I've said, he almost stumbled because he almost fell into sin because he was envious of those who boast, those who don't fear God, those who are unbelievers. Let's continue to verses 12 and 13. Psalms 73, verses 12 and 13. Behold, these are the ungodly who are always at ease. They increase in riches. Surely I have cleansed my heart in vain and washed my hands in innocence. So you see, Asaph is complaining here. He said, you see, I'm envious of the unbelievers. Why? Because these people are unbelievers, yet they are prosperous. They are prospering, while I, who am fearing the Lord, am still in poverty. I'm not prospering at all. So it is in vain that I've been fearing the Lord. It is in vain that I've been serving God. It is in vain that I'm showing the glory of God through my life. So he was frustrated. But let's go to verses 16 to 19. And we'll see what happened to Asaph. Verses 16 to 19. When I thought how to understand this, it was too painful for me. So he tries to understand why the wicked were prospering while he was not prospering. It was too difficult to understand. He could not understand that. Now, verses 17 to 19. Until I went into the sanctuary. So let's start again. When I thought how to understand this, it was too painful for me. Until I went into the sanctuary of God. Then I understood their end. The end of the unbelievers. Surely you set them in slippery places. You cast them down to destruction. Oh, how they are brought to desolation, as in a moment they are utterly consumed with terrors. So you see, there is no need to be envious of unbelievers. We must not at all be envious of unbelievers. We generally see how they easily prosper, while we born again Christians seem never to prosper, at least financially, materially, and socially. We think that they are in a better position than ourselves. Yet when we go to God in prayer, when we talk to God as Simon Peter did, when we go into the sanctuary of God, we then understand that we must not at all be envious of unbelievers. Not at all. So instead of complaining, we must go to God in prayer. We must go into his sanctuary. And here, God clearly explains to us. So when we go into God's sanctuary, he will clearly explain to us, as he did all throughout his word, that there is no profit to be an unbeliever. There is no profit not to fear God. On the contrary, there is a great profit to fear God. Not only do we receive eternal life when we are God-fearers, but we also get much more than what we sacrifice for the sake of the Lord. So our rewards when we fear God is not only after our death, it's not only when we go to heaven, it's not only the crowns that we will get in heaven, it is also on this world. We will receive much more than what we sacrifice, as Jesus told Simon Peter. Dear brethren, there is much profit to fear God. Thank you very much for watching. Have a very nice day. God bless you abundantly beyond all your expectations.